I think we should get started then. Thank you all for joining us today on this everything you needed to know about managing corporate SaaS, but we're afraid to ask. My name's Phil Caruso. I'm the Vice President of Demand Generation here at Sakon. I have two folks that are going to be going through the webinar with you today. One of them is Arthur Papanastasio. Arthur is our platform evangelist. Yes. You know, he is an expert on our platform. He's been several years in this industry, and he has taken a special interest in SaaS management as Sakon has started to go into that field. He has been, working on some of the requirements and really getting to understand what this emerging marketplace looks like. The other person that we have on the webinar today is Hyun Park. Hyun is a longtime analyst in our space. I think I met Hyun, practically 10 years ago when I was working elsewhere. So he's a longtime expert in this space. Hyun was the founder of Amalgam Insights, and he also serves as its CEO. Amalgam focuses on technology, analytics, and financial tools needed for support emerging business models. And over the last 20 years, Hyun has been at the forefront of trends like Moneyball, social networking, BYOD, the subscription economy, and video as the dominant use of internet bandwidth. Hyun is often quoted in media sources like USA Today, the Los Angeles Times, and a wide variety of mainstream and technology press sources. I want to welcome both Hyun and Arthur today. And let's get started. We will be taking questions, and we will be doing that at the end of the webinar. You can do the questions via chat, and I will be collating them and asking them at the end of the webinar. So as the webinar is going on, please feel free to chat out your questions. And Hyun, Arthur, take it away.
All right, terrific. Thanks, guys, for showing up today. My name's Hyun Park. I'm the CEO and Principal Analyst here at Amalgam Insights. I'm going to be tag teaming with Arthur today, and we're going to be showing you the challenges and practical aspects of managing SaaS, software as a service, one of the emerging key challenges in IT management right now. As we start moving forward, what we're going to do is I'm going to start setting the stage by talking about some of the key trends, and then Arthur will be providing some color commentary on how this is practically done in 2018 in the here and now. So if we go to the next slide, we can start figuring out what is the agenda. What are we actually going to talk about here in terms of managing corporate SaaS? So the agenda we have set up here. Why SaaS is becoming the next big pain point is going to be what we're going to be looking at first. So especially for some of you who might think this is an interesting idea, but what does this have to do with me? Especially if you're in telecom, network, mobility, IT project management, operations, or other areas where SaaS is not currently a huge part of your life. Second part of the agenda is playing hide and seek and figuring out where these SaaS accounts are and how to find them. Third part, about figuring out what do you have? So getting into the inventory side of things. How do you actually build out a SaaS inventory that makes sense, and why is it challenging, and then what can you get from it? Next up, how do you use SaaS? So figuring out what are the usage patterns associated with this. Next, going to spring cleaning for SaaS, where we're looking at the optimization aspects, and then recommendations for getting SaaSy in your organization, figuring out what you should actually do going forward to make sure all of this works. So the next slide, this is me. As Phil alluded to before, I've been in technology for over 20 years now, done a variety of things, including managing telecom expenses at multiple enterprises. I used to handle carrier billing for a couple of small CLECs that have gone by and away. I dropped out of school in the mid-90s to work on fantasy baseball. So I've been working with analytics and data for a long time. but have gotten into the telecom world and have been here for about, again, 20 years now. Really deeply looking at service orders and expenses. So anyways, why is SaaS becoming the next pain point? If we go to the next slide, we can start seeing some of the pros and cons for for managing enterprise SaaS. So here are the things that make you want to manage enterprise SaaS. Just think about it as a pure spend category as a starting point. It's growing 25 to 30% per year, very quickly. Global SaaS is doubling over the next 3 years from 50 billion to 100 billion globally, meaning that this expense is growing to become a major challenge. The pain points are similar to mobility pain points in that you were thinking about how to manage end users. You have bring your own app happening all over the place, just like bring your own device. Just think about what's out there from a Dropbox perspective, or people choosing their own app from a productivity or sales optimization perspective, whatever it might be. And because these are all end user based applications, you're able to, these applications end up being very important from a productivity perspective and in understanding how people actually get work done. And these SaaS accounts are also subscription and usage based, which is two separate things. So on the one hand, you've got these subscription costs that happen every month. You're $20 a month per user or $100 a month per user, whatever it might be. And then there might also be a usage-based charge based on how much you use the application or what additional add-ons you add. To those of us coming in from the telecom or mobility world, this sounds a whole lot like your basic cell phone or your basic phone line, where you'll have your monthly charge plus your usage plus whatever features you're adding on. SaaS is exactly the same way, which makes it a good expense to be able to manage from an enterprise perspective, yet too complex for traditional expense management solutions. So for those reasons, these are good reasons to manage SaaS from an enterprise perspective. Now the cons, the hard part. So there are hundreds or thousands of new vendors that you've got to start finding here. It's amazing to see how much SaaS exists in the enterprise world. According to recent studies done by both analyst firms and security vendors, you'll ask your average CIO, how many SaaS vendors are you using in your organization for, say, $1 billion company? They'll say 30, maybe 40. And then you'll poll for the activity that's happening on your network. You find the numbers more like 900, 1,400, just insane numbers, orders of magnitude different. IT is either just underestimating this challenge or simply has no idea of how much SaaS is out there not being managed from an enterprise perspective, meaning, more importantly, what is not being handled through the governance and compliance and the spending and sourcing at scale that are all part of enterprise tech. So big opportunity here for SaaS. Often SaaS sourcing is done outside of IT. Estimates are about half of SaaS spend is happening outside of IT, which makes a whole lot of sense when you think about Salesforce or Adobe or the ease of purchasing Office 365 or Google Apps or whatever it might be. Because it's only $5 or $10 a month, in many of these cases, you can just shove it into a credit card expense and nobody's ever going to see it, which is fine for a one-off. But what if you have 10 of these accounts, 100, 1,000? What if you have this gigantic shadow Google Apps implement ecosystem in your organization that just nobody knows about because nobody's ever tried to track it down? So that's a challenge. Third challenge is around discovery, having to chase down these credit cards, expense accounts, etc. This is like BYOD on steroids, trying to find all of these new devices and accounts. And then finally, another key challenge around enterprise SaaS at this point is that there are no real billing standards. So unlike the carriers that at least have a basic EDI call records and at least data standards that they provide from a billing perspective, it's not like Slack and Microsoft Office 365 and Salesforce and Adobe and NetSuite all got together and said, here's what our bill should look like. They all have chosen different ways of doing this. So there's a whole lot of variety, not much standardization. We can make this a real pain to manage. So this leads us to playing hide and seek with SaaS. So How do we do that? How do we actually find what we're looking for? The three areas that we think about are identifying key SaaS vendors through accounts payable, expense management, network management, device management. Basically, there are these worlds of financial, technical, and device-based identity ways of and identity-based ways of finding these vendors. Second is around identifying the admins and personnel who are actually using SaaS. And then the third is around defining administrative and billing portals, invoices, and charges associated with SaaS. So digging into that discovery a little bit, the next slide starts showing the complexity of SaaS discovery. You can see that there are a lot of different ways of being able to discover SaaS from a practical perspective. On the upper left-hand side, we can see expense and AP, accounts payable. We can see single sign-on. These are external systems that all serve as an overlay that end up sucking in the data that we see, but don't necessarily detect the actual apps themselves. They're not connected to the actual apps from a functional perspective. These are overlays. On the right-hand side, we can see network management and endpoint management. On the bottom right, you can see web proxies and browser plugins. So you can also start looking at web activity. There are solutions out there where you can actually add plugins to certain browsers to figure out which apps are being targeted. And then on the bottom left, for the most mature type of solution, you can actually dig into specific app APIs as well as cloud access service brokers. So I'll pass it over to Arthur here with a quick question that when you're seeing enterprises in the here and now that are just starting to figure out what to do with SaaS, how are they figuring out what's actually out there?
That's a great question. A lot of enterprises are being kind of caught off guard because in a sense, it's back at 2008 with the iPhone at the enterprise, right? Where the users are bringing it in and users are causing adoption, whether IT likes it or not. And so we're seeing a huge shift, just like you mentioned, from the former ways of managing software to cloud and software as a service activities. This is, like you mentioned, causing problems for in the area of visibility. And so that's where we focus our efforts first. Companies are having to take a hard look at their normal AP systems and what they know about, and then, through our discovery process, just like you have on the display here, we are looking at the expense management systems and the device management systems to see what's running on what. And in some cases, we have to get a little more sophisticated in order to discover it. Like you're saying, looking at network activity and looking at different API and app permissions traveling through the firewall in and out of the network. And so it is a challenge because a lot of IT departments are not thinking in this mindset yet that they need to understand it all because they don't see it all. It's almost like they don't know what they don't see, so they're not worried about it yet. And so we're trying to help enterprises change that mindset, and in the same way that we have had lots of successes in discovering and implementing inventories of fixed line services and mobility services, now the next open frontier is building a new kind of inventory, which is the SaaS software subscription inventory.
Right. So this is what I'd say here is agreeing with Arthur that this is a real challenge. Of course, there are many different ways to do this, but from a practical perspective, the easiest areas to start with tend to be expense management, so like general expense management and procurement credit card type solutions, accounts payable, endpoint management, which I'm using unified endpoint management, meaning kind of the successor to mobile device management. So
as well as MDM systems, I was going to add that they have good data as to what's running on the devices, and so that leads to deeper conversations in the discovery process.
Right. Those are good places to start. Frankly, the bottom right around web proxies and browser plugins, that might not work with your organization based on what you have to support from a IT security perspective. Not everybody wants to put something in their browsers for many good reasons. APIs and app permissions in the bottom left hand tend to be pretty savvy technical work. Yes, it's a great way to be able to find some of these applications, but often subtle, and every app is a little bit different. So you can get stuck in the weeds there. So I wouldn't necessarily start there if you're trying to cover all of your bases. Great. And then going to the next slide, we can also talk about finding corporate SaaS users. So of course, part of this discovery process isn't just finding the apps, but finding the users. And part of the challenge with SaaS here is, again, because it's so cheap, you can quickly shove an expense meant for perhaps a contractor or a partner, even a customer or unrelated third party, just because it's easier to buy them a $10 a month app and then connect them to some informal network or application rather than go through IT. This is stuff that needs to be collected and audited as you start dealing with SaaS at an enterprise level. So this is a challenge as well. Luckily, from an employee side, we can start with the HRIS and Active Directory, the basic usual suspects. So at least we've got that to start with. Next up, thinking about what SaaS do you have? This is where we start thinking about the inventory. And I tend to think about this at kind of 3 levels. First, aggregating at the top level, aggregating all accounts from each vendor to a single administrative instance, because you're going to have a lot of accounts out there. I think about this back to my telecom days and thinking about just these AT&T OneNet bills, for instance, that I was always getting. A lot of one-page accounts that start coming in and really start becoming an administrative and overhead nightmare because you're dealing with 300 different bills for the exact same vendor. Same type of thing can potentially happen in SaaS if you're not in control. And then on the right side of that in purple, assigning each license, instance, and usage pattern to an employee, department, project, or cost center, making sure that there's alignment between that inventory and all the users that you have. This sounds basic as well, but without doing that initial step that we talked about before of discovery, of even knowing who those users are, you're not going to be able to get to this next step of simply assigning these costs to the right department or the right user. So moving to the middle, I consider these employees, SaaS, and devices are kind of this trifecta or triple crown of end user computing. If you're really going to understand what's happening from a productivity perspective, you need to know who the user is. You need to know where the application is. You need to know where that app is being used as well from whatever usage data that you have. And then once you have that, you can start really wrapping your hands around what is happening from a SaaS usage perspective. Without one of these 3 areas, you're flying a little blind here. And frankly, the majority of enterprises are currently flying blind, have very little idea of what is actually happening from a SaaS perspective, even though IT's job is supposed to be around managing technology and making end users more productive. So this bottom point here is around constant vigilance, meaning that, of course, SaaS is as a service. It's a subscription. It comes in every month, and you'll have new accounts or services or that come in every month. So you have to have constant vigilance here. Things will always come in, always come out. And you always need to be syncing this on a regular basis to your employee base, your device base, and the intended applications that you need to be using. So I'm going to pass this over to Arthur. Be interested in your perspective on how SaaS inventories actually are being built and what level of detail is there right now?
So this varies a little bit vendor to vendor, but a lot of the SaaS providers are including very detailed information. And in some cases, the structure of the SaaS offering is really complex as well. In other words, on the inventory side, once we discover the SaaS, some of them, a good example might be like Microsoft Office 365, where you have products, and within the software product, you have multiple subscriptions. And then within each different subscription, you might have multiple groupings of applications that they offer. So, for example, everyone knows the E1 might have OneDrive and Exchange and Skype and I forgot the fourth one. But the idea is that we can build the inventory and associate, when we bring in the data, the usage as well, and report on adoption and utilization numbers against the individual applications and which subscriptions they roll up to and which products they roll up to. So it's very, very complex in some cases. And we've, in the Sakon platform, devised a way to represent this that's very clear and easy. And once you build it, it becomes much simpler to manage. But then, just like you mentioned, there's a lot of parallels to the mobility management universe, in that, we need a unique identifier from the HRIS system to identify the person. And then once we have that, we can associate traditional inventory and mobile inventory, and now even other IT assets like laptops and things. But, now SaaS subscriptions. And there's a challenge there in that there's possibly a different identifier as the user's ID, or the way to identify a user in the SaaS side. But once that's done, we can make that association. And then, like you said, we have the, constant vigilance. That's what really stood out to me here on this slide, right? Constant vigilance, meaning that things are coming on and being discontinued, and things moving up, down, and sideways all the time. And so you do need a constant feed and synchronization to the user base, and who has what, who's using what. And as you mentioned, managing the employee and associating their SaaS and any devices. And then also, from pulling the bills in, of course, we're looking at usage and consumption information. We're looking at utilization, in some cases quite detailed. And this level of detail can be different for different enterprises and their needs. Some want it and some don't want it, and they have a choice in some cases as to how deep we represent it in the system. But if an enterprise came to us and said, we want to know everything, we want all the insights we can glean from this program, we have that ability to bring it all in, associate it all to the end users, and then provide it in reports and visualizations and dashboards. And when you see them in the platform, it is amazing what you can learn. It's really, really cool. And we have really pushed this to the limit in assigning the licenses and understanding, who has what, where are they, and what it costs. So if a business wanted to represent it as so many subscriptions per person, or so many cost, per employee, cost per site location, cost per bed in a medical industry, or whatever it might be, we can adapt the numbers to the key indicators that matter to a particular business.
Great. And just as an aside there, I think that flexibility that Arthur talks about is vitally important as you think about how to cost out IT going forward, because being able to cost out IT on a per person, per location, per department basis becomes increasingly important to thinking about IT as a benefit, and being able to line that up with your corporate budget as a whole. So, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, we definitely, it's caused us to really think about this as, how can we represent this data and express it and allow IT to utilize it so that there's actual value to the business, and so that rather than just being perceived as a cost center, IT can bring value and be contributing through some of the other things we're going to talk about, through optimization and so on, to the increased profits and the bottom line of the company, and be less of a cost center and more build toward a profit center. So that has caused us to really look at this in different ways to prove value to the business.
Right, which is a good setup for the next topic. So once we've set up this SaaS inventory, the next question is, how do you use SaaS? So on this next slide, we have kind of this quick maturity guide for how to track usage, the stuff that is coming in on a monthly basis, and how to get the most value out of it. At a beginning level, you should be looking at application logins, obviously looking for zero-use accounts, as well as getting an idea of who is using these accounts and how this is aligning to each department and each user. Basic visibility on that left-hand side. obviously matters. In the middle, you can start digging into how these applications are being used from a functional perspective, getting an idea perhaps of which features are being used more often, or which capabilities are being used, or which at least which features and which packages the users actually have in place. Starting to dig down to perhaps either a feature level or a usage level view of what is happening. Now, not every application provides this level of detail, but to the extent that it happens, it is visible. You can start getting a deeper idea of what is happening. So, for instance, with Office 365, you can get some pretty good detail on what is happening, at least on the Outlook side from a collaboration perspective. So things like that can be useful. But on the far right, just like Arthur was talking about before, we can start thinking about business value as well. So when I talk about this, track the functional usage of why do you use it, now you can start thinking about, for each of these major SaaS applications, actually going to the end users and figuring out, what do you actually use this app for? Because it may be that they are underutilizing the application as is, or they may be, say, on a consumer grade or premium account, and they should actually be on an enterprise grade account to take full advantage of what's going on. This is an opportunity for IT to start being more strategic and not just talk about cost reduction, but also revenue enhancement and productivity enhancement. It's an area that we don't get into often enough on the IT side, or especially on the sourcing and expense side. But with a SaaS management strategy, you start having actual visibility to how the entire organization works. And it would be a shame to simply use that to be able to pay the bills and do nothing else. I know, Arthur, that you've taken a pretty good look at some of these usage details, especially for the major applications. I'm curious to see how this matches up with what you've been supporting over in Sakon.
You know, it's interesting, the level of detail that can be obtained from some of the providers can be used for much more than just, looking at costs or processing bills. Functionally within management, there's a performance element where if you wanted to see, is everyone who's supposed to be in a certain job role doing and using, the tools and doing the activities that they're supposed to be doing? And so it might be a little bit of job performance that can come from the data and the insights that we can show. Another value to the business from a cost perspective is in just right sizing what you have, because if there were, say, a subscription with 5 applications that came with it, and you notice that 2 of them, almost no one has even activated it, right? Because we can show which subscriptions you have, what the total costs are, and we can annualize it or show it monthly. However, regardless of billing cycle, we can represent it in ways that make sense to the business. But then we can show how many out of what you've purchased are activated, and then how many are actually using it and not using it. And so having that level of detail, again, it allows you to look at things and gain different kinds of insights than you might have been able to prior. Even more so, I think, than in the mobility realm, but knowing this now, I might look at other versions of the offering from the SaaS provider, and come renewal time, I might be able to change to a much lower cost program that has the 2 main ones that we use out of the 5, or the 3 out of the 5 that we actually use. And I don't have to overbuy, because number 1, I have visibility into it now, and number 2, I can do something about it. And in just touching on some of the other tangential areas that really matter, we bring the contracts in, and we use that inventory and cost and contract cost data when we process the invoices. And so there's other ways to, use the usage and the costs in helping out financially within the business. It's more than functional usage, and why, if we have a good match, then okay, we're optimizing how we're using it and what we're using and why we're using it. But if we look at how do we optimize costs, there's other ways, you might spot billing errors in the traditional expense management sense. And, we would, in the Sakon platform, we would, flag that as an exception, and we would investigate and maybe open a dispute with a vendor. I mean, if you had 1,000 users on a subscription and, you went to 900 over a course of, say, 6 weeks, well, that next invoice should show perhaps less users, right? And maybe less expense. And so if it came through with 1,000 still on it, would you even know? Would you know that, you ought to look at that? And so we have the ability to, in an instant, understand, we're tracking it now. Where are we? What are the changes? And what does that mean we do even when the next invoice hits, or come renewal time, we can help procurement with much better data to negotiate better deals.
Excellent. So based on that, when you've got this usage visibility, the next step would be the next slide, spring cleaning for SaaS. Sure, we're almost into summer, but we've got a couple of days left in theory, right? So moving to the next slide, we can talk about how to optimize your environment. And this isn't, I would say this is a fully comprehensive pyramid, but this gives you an idea of where to start and where to move forward. So I would say that traditional IT has traditionally been good at these bottom layers of identifying zero usage accounts, identifying duplicate licenses. Things like that aren't too hard to figure out once you've got your inventory in place, and it fits into this idea of cost structure and cost reduction. But when we start moving up this pyramid, this next level can exist as a big challenge in SaaS of pointing out duplicate solutions. For the past few years, SaaS has been kind of a free-for-all where anybody can get any kind of solution they want. You might have, for instance, sales, marketing, service operations, manufacturing, and IT all using different project management solutions. Is that really the best way to do this, with everybody having their own project management capabilities, or is there an opportunity to perhaps consolidate or choose the best in breed option, and then also being able to source and take advantage of the purchasing power that you have? Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. But one of the things you can do once you start managing SaaS inventories and SaaS expenses is to see where there are duplicate solutions in the same category of SaaS spend. And then moving up beyond that, you might be able to see underutilized licenses and functionalities, such as Arthur was just talking about with some of these more complicated suites of services where you might have 3, 4, 5, or 6 applications, and you only use one, but you're paying for 6 or 12 or 19. But on the top of this pyramid, also interestingly, is around identifying missing functionality. And to understand why that happens, this is part of what drives digital transformation, all of these buzzwordy efforts about making IT more advanced and moving to as a service and on demand, blah, 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 blah. But let's get beyond that hype for a little bit. If we go to the next slide, think about why do we do these things of digital transformation, and why do we have these multi-million-dollar projects that end up ultimately changing what we do? Companies want to make money from tech investments. That sounds really straightforward, but we don't always think about IT that way. We don't always think, oh, we are giving this person this phone or this app or access to these computing elements because we want to make money as a company. So when you start thinking about it from that mindset, this doesn't necessarily mean you have to make a direct matchup between every single thing you provide from a technology perspective and then a direct revenue component. But in the SaaS, particularly for SaaS, you can start seeing what functionalities your employees do and don't have, and then being able to both rationalize these accounts from a reduction of services perspective, as well as being able to enhance these services. Perhaps not only are you only using 3 out of 5 apps for your current solution, but perhaps there are 2 other apps that you would be using if you went to a higher grade solution that have traditionally been helpful, or that high performance employees are already purchasing and expensing on their own. there's a lot of visibility you have in here to the activity that is happening in your organization. And with the emergence of SaaS management, you now have good visibility into what differentiates high performance from low performance employees, quite frankly, from a SaaS perspective, which could be a very powerful tool going forward for your organization. So based on that, I have some key recommendations here. Going to the next slide, just some reminders here. First, discovery is a multi-departmental process: technical, financial, operational. If you start thinking about every possible way to do your SaaS discovery, yes, you could probably make it a multi-year process to go through every single possible area. But in reality, you should pick the areas where you have systems that are easily available and can be easily parsed to figure out what you have in place. This should not end up being a multi-year process. It just could be if you end up taking on every single option and investing in every single possible way of doing discovery. Next up, second, just a reminder that from an inventory perspective, inventory requires a combination of aggregation, assignment, and ongoing monitoring. It's not enough to simply look for the actual licenses or the actual accounts or the actual vendors and stop there. You need to do some additional work in shaping this because, frankly, the vast majority of organizations are building an enterprise-grade SaaS inventory for the first time. Arthur, I was just curious. I know you have a lot of experience building inventories, both in SaaS and otherwise. I was wondering if you had any key insights or warnings for companies as they start thinking about inventory building.
So inventory is kind of the key to all the good results that most companies want to get from managing the program and controlling expenses, understanding who's using what and so on. And it's not a matter. My statement would only be it's more if you do it or if you don't do it, right? Because some companies are not going down this path and they have to. It's not a choice anymore. You have to understand what you have. Just processing the bills and trying to do point solutions that take care of only part of this, that's going to be minimally effective. You will get some results, but in the long run, you'll find in expense management, fixed services, mobility services, you can waste millions of dollars doing this the wrong way and then have to, after a 3-year engagement, start over and do it the right way, right? We have a lot of that going on these days. But in the SaaS realm, it's even more important because my understanding is that the size of the SaaS market is going to begin to match and meet and maybe eventually exceed, these other areas, these other IT expenses. SaaS is such a huge and fast-growing segment of IT expense that, like you said, it's going to double in the next year. And I think I've seen other studies that say that in the next 18 to 24 months, 3 out of 4 businesses everywhere will be at or about 100% SaaS. Nothing running in their own servers and local machines anymore. And so the shift is well underway. It's almost done. And so concerning building an inventory, my comment and my, urging to enterprises is look at this today, start doing it now. And, the less of a point solution you have, the more of a comprehensive solution you're using, the better.
Yes, I totally agree. This whole management challenge is changing from point solutions to trying to figure out how do you manage all of this end user computing assets and tools all in one place.
Well, I know it's a shameless plug, but think about if you could have all your fixed line services, every circuit, voice data, whatever you have, all your locations, all your mobility, all your user base, and all your SaaS subscriptions and their assignments in one system. Like, how cool would that be? That's what we have. So I know it's a shameless plug, but we really have it today, and I would encourage people to take a closer look.
Excellent. Just a note for the audience, we have 2 recommendations left, so start thinking about those questions that you want to ask at the end. The next slide, just talking about usage monitoring. Just a reminder here that usage monitoring at the SaaS level includes looking at logins, looking at feature-based usage, and then the harder question of figuring out why are you using this and being able to rationalize and consolidate accounts where possible. You can start doing this on a month-to-month or quarter-to-quarter basis, the same way that you frankly do with other assets and other services in your IT organization. And then finally, the last recommendation here around optimization on the next slide is that optimization is not just a way to cut costs, but also a consultative opportunity to translate tech into money. You have this view into the productivity of your organization once you have built out this inventory and usage visibility correctly. So take advantage of what you have there. And remember that this can be a bridge from moving from perhaps a traditional support role to a more strategic role in your organization. So with that, the next slide here just gives you a very quick framework: discovery, inventory, usage management, optimization. The keys to starting to get in control of the SaaS spending that is coming up here. And with that, we can start going into the questions that you guys have.
All right. So if everyone could start putting in some questions, we've already got a couple in, and I will bring them up now. The first thing, Hyun, that came in was about getting started with building this inventory and things like that. You know, who do you need to bring together within the organization to start this? Because I know a lot of times that the SaaS decisions aren't necessarily made by IT. Often they're at the line of business level. So who do you need to involve to get this process started within an organization?
So I think a couple of good people to bring in are someone from AP who is handling credit cards, procurement, as well as operational expenses, to be able to provide guidance into what is the stuff that is sneaking in to spend. And it is likely that somebody from either sales ops or marketing ops will already be handling a significant amount of SaaS spend. Sales and marketing are notorious for being lone wolves and getting whatever they want. I would start there, at least in terms of bringing together a couple of other people from other departments to make sure that you are really getting SaaS together. And of course, you're also going to have to make the case for why managing SaaS is better enterprise-wide in terms of being able to save costs, take away the stupid administrative tasks that, frankly, IT is much better at than sales or any other department, because we've been dealing with IT accounts for decades. That would be the starting point. Of course, your organization, it really depends on who is using SaaS the most. Okay.
Yeah. That whole sales and marketing get whatever they want. You say that like it's a bad thing.
I'm not.
Yeah.
So
You can make it more good by letting them focus on just having the toys and not having to make them take care of them as well.
And that's probably the tack you need to take to make sure that you get them engaged in helping you with the solution.
Right.
We also
this is politics. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. We also had a question about tracking usage. Do you need to install some type of agent on each device to see what that SaaS app, who's accessing it, what's being accessed? Where does that data come from?
So there's several ways to do it. Putting an agent on each device, if you can do that, yes, that will give you a deep amount of data if you have a good device management, mobility management, endpoint management solution, whatever your vendor tends to be calling that. But there are other ways to take a look at this as well. If your organization is using a single sign-on and makes that well used in your organization, that's another way to be able to figure out who is at least logging into which application on a regular basis. And in addition, the invoices themselves will have some usage information as well. Some of it is quite good. Some of it is almost non-existent. So it'll depend greatly from vendor to vendor. So there are different ways of being able to look at usage. And Arthur, feel free to chime in.
One thing we've seen, thank you. One thing we've seen is that in a lot of cases, the vendors are sophisticated and they do offer, last login date and many other types of more granular usage data points, which we can bring into the system. And, for anyone who's attending, who's got a streak of geek running through them, if you could see in the application a histogram, just like a quadrant, a graph, with a bunch of dots on it, you can know, like, where are all the dots? Are they spread out? Are they up and to the right? Are they down and to the left? Are we really using this in a way that we should? Are we underusing it? Are we just, pat ourselves on the back? We're just really, really using it a lot and in the right ways. You can know those kinds of things in many cases from the vendor because they do actually have that kind of data. And one other comment about the invoice is that it might be perceived that an invoice that comes in that has no detail, there's not much you can do with that. However, we've been dealing with this for probably 14 years in the fixed and mobility services realm. So we can create if you could imagine a single invoice, $20,000, 300 users, and that's all you get on the bill. We can turn that into a fully financially allocated out set of cost structures out to the financial system so that all the GL chargeback and internal billing can be done properly. And that's part of why we can show a business your costs per user in the SaaS area are this. And we're not talking about, total cost per user necessarily of $50, $60, $70, $80 like we see in mobility commonly. These could be hundreds of dollars per user, where to optimize is not just going to shave $10 a user off the bottom line. Businesses have the potential, every one of them is run differently. So, I have to say that, your end results will vary a little bit, but some businesses are running in such a way now, like you said, how many do you have? 90. How many do they really have? 1,400, right? So it's like such a orders of magnitude of difference in what they know and are aware of and can see. Therefore, there's orders of magnitude of potential for savings in some cases from what you might be thinking. So this is really something worthwhile to look into and to do properly.
Yeah. All right. I had another question, and that was regarding, your slide, Hyun, with the pyramid, where you had sort of the traditional IT and then the strategic IT. How do you move up the pyramid to go from managing the costs to really enhancing the business value of SaaS?
So one of the most difficult parts is that just because you have visibility to this new level of SaaS inventory and usage doesn't mean that other people are aware of it. So again, this is another politics play, but in this case, I think it really is worth going up the ladder to CIO or at least VP level personnel who are in IT, process management, strategy, and letting them know simply that this data exists. Anybody who's at a high managerial level, who you tell them, I know every single, I can see every single app that or employees are using on a daily basis and have a good idea of who's using them, who's not, and how they're using them differently from each other. That should set up a lot of bells and alerts in their minds of how they can use information like that to both to figure out perhaps if employees are doing a good job, or perhaps if an app is a bad investment because it's not being used. Every department has opportunities to be able to look at that. But first, the SaaS manager the expense manager needs to show a little executive it needs to move to the executives, need to start that conversation and show a little initiative.
Oh, that's It's good advice. Sometimes people don't realize just how valuable the data that they're looking at every day could be in a more strategic context. They're always looking at trees and not really seeing forest. So,
Yeah.
I don't think we have any more questions. I'll give everybody a sec if you've got any last questions that you might want to type in.
Hyun, I want to thank you. It was a very interesting and worthwhile use of time. I think you had a lot of great insights, and really appreciate you sharing with us today. Would love to do it again in the future if you would like to. And thank you again so much.
Oh, this has been
thank you so much.
such a pleasure, and I'm glad we're able to educate the audience out there. Thank you, everybody who showed up, and everybody who will be listening to this in the future. I hope this helps you to manage your SaaS.
Great. Thanks, Hyun, and we will be sending out the recording. You should have it very soon, shortly, probably in the next day or two. And we really do appreciate your joining us today. Our contact information is there on the screen if you want to have a follow-up conversation with us or about how Sakon can help you to manage your SaaS infrastructure. Thanks again, and we look forward to having you at our future webinars.